Hello, art historians, and welcome to our next ism of Unit 8, where we're going to be moving into Romanticism. And just like Neoclassicism was a direct reaction to Rococo, Romanticism is going to be a complete reaction to Neoclassicism. So you'll see if Neoclassical really starts around 1750, Romanticism's really going to get its start around 1789, 1790, where it starts to kind of get its own momentum going. Okay, so basically here's what it comes down to. All right, one of the big events you guys need to know contextually wise for Romanticism is going to be the Industrial Revolution. Another thing that's going to happen is so put the R's together. Romanticism really came from the revolution. So for example, there was the American Revolution, French Revolution, Haitian Revolution, Latin American Revolution, and the Romanticists really didn't think that these were looking at the right issues. They were really all about government, but not really about people. And Romanticists were really concerned with the fact that there's things going on that aren't being fixed. So for example, one of their big ones that the Romanticists generally tended to kind of go against was slavery and making sure that slavery was abolished and human injustices. So if Neoclassical is very cerebral and very intelligent and you have to really think about it, the Romanticists are all about feeling. And that does not necessarily mean love. It can mean any feeling. These guys were kind of over worrying about the past. Like Neoclassical was all about the past and Greece and Rome and those ideas. Romanticists are like, no, we really need to worry about now. Like we need to look at what is happening in the present and how we can fix that problem, because we can't look at everything through our brain. We have to feel things through our heart. These guys did not believe that just thinking things through was the answer. In order for real change to happen, we needed to see each other as human beings. And these guys are much more individual than they are about the state. It's not really so much an us to them. It's much more about how I'm feeling about these issues at the time. So the Industrial Revolution, for example, a lot of these guys didn't like it. They didn't like that it was destroying nature. They didn't like that it was turning people into mindless working robots. They didn't like that it was creating this huge social class disparity. Romanticists have feeling. They don't really necessarily care how you feel. It's really about how they feel. Like they're very much into, this is how I feel, and I'm going to paint how I feel. All right. So while Neoclassical art generally all looks the same, I mean, to be honest, like it's really difficult to tell artists apart. Romanticists will not all look the same because they don't all feel the same, and they will paint how they feel and what they are feeling about. So for example, some of them have issues with nature. Some of them have issues with slavery. They all have different things and they all have different ways of expressing that, just like we do. These guys are over factories. They are over marble and stone. They are all about going back to nature and really looking at this beauty of nature and the power that nature has. And I mean, they're basically hippies a little bit, some of them, but they're all very imaginative and they're really worried about how much we're thinking about things and not feeling. They really are focused on the here and now and not the past. Like move on from that. We've got issues we need to deal with right now. Now, Romanticism actually doesn't start as an art movement. It starts as a literary movement, and the artwork kind of comes with that. So these guys loved stories that could make people feel something, and that did not have to necessarily be, remember I said love, very little of it was actually about love. It's more about anger and fear and sadness and using their emotions and the way they paint to get people's attention. So novels that had to do with things where you would feel emotion really were what got Romanticism started. So you probably heard of a couple of these. These are Romanticist artists at the time. So like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, which isn't realistic necessarily, but it makes you feel bad for the monster. And in Les Miserables, which is about the French Revolution, the second go around, where they're beheading people who are against the Republic, and the way that the French Revolution went, the first time when they were cutting off the heads of kings and queens and taking away people's rights in the name of the Republic. That's by Victor Hugo. That's romanticist. And Frankenstein, or however you want to call it, that was by Mary Shelley, was extremely romanticist, where you were meant to feel bad for the monster because he was out of control of his own fate. He couldn't find love. So these things that these books and these paintings that we're going to look at were really written and painted by artists who didn't like what they were seeing of tyranny of oppressive governments, or the injustices of society, or industry turning people into greedy working robots. All right. There's actually romanticist music that if you listen to, that's meant to evoke emotion. Like if you listen to Brahms or Beethoven, or you also have poetry like Keats and Lord Byron. Like all of these are poets and musicians that really got into that idea of feeling emotion in some way through what they were creating. So I call the Romanticists the artist with a heart, and they really were working for the people. Depends on which people, depending on the artist, honestly. While Neoclassical, like David's work, was really about the state and making sure that the government was supported. Now it's about the individuals, it's about the people, it's what the common man is suffering. And they viewed that society was in bad shape, that thinking too much hadn't really solved anything. And we need to feel. These are guys who are anti-slavery, pro-women, all of these, issues that, anti-racism. They're very passionate about these things, and they feel a lot of emotion, and they paint that emotion. They paint their feelings. The way they paint, you can almost see how they're feeling inside based on what they're painting. So the Romanticist movement is going to start in France because it's going to be a direct response to Neoclassicism. And by the way, those two art movements exist at the same time. You could be a Neoclassical artist or you could be a Romanticist artist. Those two artists just don't agree with each other on anything. Romanticists think that Neoclassicals think too much. Neoclassicals think that Romanticists feel too much. And it's this idea almost of how you should paint. Like Romanticists don't really draw. They're more about color and using that as expressive, whereas Neoclassical are all about lines and making sure that it's very neat and clear. So like even the way that these guys painted was different, not just what they were painting. So a really good artist, this one's not on the 250. I have no idea why it's not, to be perfectly honest with you. I have no idea. But this is the painting that really started the Romanticist movement. And it's by Theodore Géricault, who is the father of French Romanticism. And it's called the Raft of the Medusa. And he was so angry whenever he painted this. Like he was just so furious about an event that had happened. And he didn't live very long, which may be because he was so passionate and intense and lived like this very intense lifestyle. But remember, France had that Royal Art Academy where they trained you how to paint and what to paint. And the French Royal Academy had always said that it was scenes from the past that were important and classical. Like they liked the styles of Da Vinci, Raphael, Michelangelo, like the geometric shapes, pyramid and all that. So Géricault here he's definitely French trained, but he is also very much a Romanticist. So you can see here in the Raft of the Medusa, you have this pyramid and your eye, all the lines, everybody reaching, all the lines of the body draws your eye up to the figure at the top who is African, who is waving this flag in desperation when all these people are laying on this raft and dying. So this is the Raft of the Medusa, and you can see that they use that Baroque lighting, that shifting of colors from dark to light to draw your eye and your attention up towards the main feature, which is this person up here at the top who is waving desperately for help. And you can see the despair on the faces of the people. You can see that people have died, that this is a terrible situation. So what the Medusa was about that made Géricault so angry was this was a French government ship. They were actually taking colonists to Senegal, right? So when they were doing that, the captain, who'd basically gotten his job because he was somebody's kid, and he was named by the government, all right? And also at the same time, he was supporting like the royalists. So basically he got this job by sucking up to the royal family who is back in power now after the revolution. The boat sank because of him. He ran it too close to shore. The boat was starting to sink. And in order to get off the boat, the crew and the captain and the upper class people got in the lifeboats. And then they threw together this makeshift raft for the slaves from Africa and the lower class passengers, 149 of them. And they put them on this raft and they were towing it with the lifeboats, but they realized that was slowing down the lifeboats. So they cut the ropes and let the raft with these people on it out in the water without food or water for 12 days. Only 15 of the 149 survived. And you can see here in this, and Jericho was very passionate about getting this right. Like he went and saw bodies that had laid out in the sun for days. He went and looked at this to see what it would actually really have been like. And this is how big it is. Now, this is something different. This is, for the first time, we're seeing a huge amount of paint and canvas being used to paint, not something from the past, but something from the present. And it wasn't biblical and it wasn't heroic in the eye of the average person. The French Royal Academy would have said, this is not heroic. It's not some hero like David or, some Greek god or some Roman soldier. And he's like, no, it is heroic because your eye draws up to this African man who is the hope that heroism can come from anywhere. That's a romantic idea. And he's the one waving for help, to kind of wave people to come and help them as much as possible. This is every bit romantic. He is, the way that he painted it with these lines and using this sharp color to show the rotting bodies and guiding your eye up towards the heroism. He's painting how he feels about this. And those dark, muted colors show that this is not a happy scene. This is tragic and it's wrong. And people in France were like, how did you waste that much paint and canvas on something that's not heroic, not classical, not intelligent? And he's like, because this isn't intelligent. This was wrong. It's feeling instead of thought. And it is heroic in an entirely new way. So this painting is kind of what Romanticism was about. It's about feeling of the artist and their feeling of a particular issue. And in this case, you've got Jericho, who is very, very upset about how much the lower classes are suffering. And it's this idea that heroism can rise from any place. It doesn't have to be a soldier or somebody from a government. And he paints, again, his feelings. He's using the colors to express his feelings. He's using the drama of the pyramidal shape where you can see the waves that are crashing around them, that the man is faceless at the top because it doesn't matter. It's anybody can be a hero, not just one person, even the lowest people of society. So another thing that the Romanticists are very big into is nature. And I don't mean just painting naturally, because they can. Not all of them do, but they can. But it's this true connection with nature. The Industrial Revolution, they thought was destroying everything. There was disease, trees were being cut down for factories and for raw materials. People were spending their entire days working in these factories, just absolutely miserable. And they believed that nature was going away and people needed to get back to their natural state. And that's where people could truly bend themselves. So this is a term for Romanticism that's important for you guys to understand, and that's called the Sublime, all right? Romanticist artists weren't looking for the Vanitas. They weren't looking for the Fête Gallant that we saw in Rococo. They are all, or the exemplum virtuosus that we see in Neoclassicism. The Sublime was, in their mind, what they were trying to create in their art was this sublime experience that is awe mixed with fear. Like, that was a sublime experience. Like, you got all of these emotions wrapped into one. Like, isn't nature amazing, but isn't it also incredible that it could destroy us all, that it's so much more powerful than anything at all? And it was trying to give people this cathartic experience of looking at it, like this love of nature and having all of these emotions when looking at it. So it's important to understand that Romanticists don't all look the same. They don't even use all the same mediums. Goya is going to use prints. Turner uses watercolor. They are completely different in how they paint. They're completely different in what they're feeling because they all feel something different. They all have different issues that speak to them. And therefore, they're all going to do their art and actually physically make it in different ways. But we do see a common theme of it being about feeling, typically something to do with the suffering of someone in some way, and it also having that nature component in it in some way. So, for example, this is the Nightmare. The Nightmare by Fuseli does not have anything to do really with nature, but it is very emotional. And actually the artist had this really weird story at the time where like he had a dream, he cheated on his girlfriend, and so she left him for it. And that haunted him the rest of his life. So this is actually maybe his nightmare. We're not actually sure. There's opium over on the table. We don't know if the thing sitting on her chest is actually real or if it's in her dream or if we're seeing the dream and her at the same time. It doesn't really make sense. So you can see here, not all Romanticist artists are the same. This guy is really just painting what he was feeling. And obviously this isn't realistic because it's showing stuff you wouldn't actually see, like whatever that is that's on her chest. All right. On the other hand, you get artists like, also not in the 250, don't understand why, Caspar David Friedrich, who was German, because Romanticism is not just, I believe Fuseli is Swiss, Caspar David Friedrich is German, Jericho is French, but obviously Romanticism is going to start there. Caspar David Friedrich is just really into this idea of nature. Like, that's where he found his emotion. He wanted people to feel things through emotion. He said the painter's task is not the faithful depiction of air, water, rocks, and trees, but as his soul and his emotion should be reflected in it. Half the time, these guys weren't even painting real places, kind of like travelers among mountains and streams. Like, this was just an idea of nature and what it should be. And they use nature to evoke feeling and to get an idea. And landscapes to them are very subjective. They're not just painting a landscape, they're painting a feeling about nature at the time. And what's really weird is Hitler loved this particular artist. So like, this is a Friedrich. They're painting, after the Napoleonic Wars, they're painting this abbey that had been destroyed. They're not just objectively painting a landscape. They're showing the cold barrenness and the destruction after and the silence that comes with snow on the ground, because snow absorbs sound. That's why it's quieter whenever it snows, or it seems like. So it's almost like this, you can hear this painting, like you're feeling the sadness that comes through it. Like, it's a very subjective landscape. Or this one of overlooking vast territories. Or I just think this one's pretty. Another abbey that had been destroyed. I think that one's really cool. This is another one. I think that's pretty too. Then, just to show you guys how different this can be. All right, so again, these aren't on the 250. I'm just giving you an idea of what this can look like. All right. Then you have English Romanticism, which you get William Blake. All right, and William Blake was actually a poet. And Blake, and if you read his poems, they're a little out there. But William Blake also is going to use like watercolor and colored pencil. So completely a different medium than anything else we saw with like Friedrich. But he is not really painting about nature. He's painting his feelings about this industrial world they were living in, which England was going through very badly at the time. William Blake believed that your imagination was necessary. Like, if you're too grounded in reason and just thinking all the time instead of feeling or imagining, you're only living half of a life or thinking with half your brain. So William Blake's a really good example of how you can see the difference between Neoclassicism and Romanticism. So both of these are scenes about Horatio Nelson, and Horatio Nelson was the great hero of the English battles against Napoleon, right? He's a huge hero, like in England. The right one is Neoclassical, where they show Horatio Nelson dying. Everybody is mourning. It's showing his true sacrifice. He's a little bit lighter, so his attention is drawn to him. On the left, that's William Blake's interpretation of Horatio Nelson, where he's imagining him as a hero and what that would look like. And okay, sure. This is another one that's really famous by William Blake, and it's called Newton. And so it shows Isaac Newton here, and he's working with like the triangles, and he's working mathematically, and Newton is almost so full of information, like he's about to burst, like he's so muscular, like it's almost like he's bulging with knowledge. But at the same time, he's grounded and stuck to the rock because he's not using imagination at all. He's just too grounded. He's too rational instead. This one's another famous one by William Blake in a series of poems called Ancient of Days that he wrote. And this is actually a watercolor and an etching called The Demon Urizen. Say that slower. The demon, your reason. Like you're thinking too much instead of feeling more. And even people about him were like, he's crazy, all right? But his crazy is what makes him so good. It's because he's not rational that makes him so good. So again, Romanticist art can look different between every single artist, every single one of them, because they're all painting their feelings and nobody feels the same. They all have different things that rile them up or upset them, and they all paint in ways that represent that. So whereas Blake's is highly imaginative in his feelings about using imagination, then we get to other English painters, which are John Constable and J.M.W. Turner. And John Constable and Turner both have major issues that they feel very deeply about. So for example, this is John Constable, and John Constable grew up before the industrial age. He grew up in the countryside in this quaint little village, and here we see this flooded little field with a hay wagon with ox walking through it, and the big sky overhead that these clouds are rolling in. And you've got all these beautiful greens and fruitfulness, and it's just this very peaceful and serene feeling that you're in awe of how beautiful nature is, but a little bit afraid of the clouds that are coming in. And Constable wants that time back. But he's not painting angry. He's not painting mad. He's not painting irrational. He's just painting this beautiful natural nature scene to express how he feels about it. That this, in his opinion, was the better time, not this industrial time. And here are a couple other John Constables that you can see, that he paints how he feels, and he paints nostalgic, and he loves, as he says, the sound of water, the old rotten planks, the slimy posts, and the brickwork. I love these. They make me a painter. He's not painting because he's not angry, he's nostalgic. And so he's making sure he gets all the detail as natural as he can so that he can remember how beautiful the nature was in this simpler time. It needs to be understood that neoclassicists hate the romanticist. They absolutely hate it. They're like, if you mean to preserve beauty in its most perfect state, you got to get rid of the emotion. Like, you can't paint with emotion, and you can't paint emotion. You're ruining it. You're like basically covering up the idea with all the emotion. And even David, who we saw with neoclassicism, who, basically paints for everybody who won't cut his head off and did the Oath of the Horatii, he hated romanticism. He's like, there's too much emotion. There's too much of you in it. And romanticist artists are like, yes, it is about me. I am painting how I feel. All right. So we're going to stop there, and we will pick up next with our first work of Romanticist art, which is this one, the Grand Odalisque.